Alan Burdick is a writer for The New Yorker. Out of Eden, An Odyssey of Ecological Invasion was his last book, which was a National Book Award finalist. And today he's going to talk about maybe one thing you should talk about is why people don't wear watches anymore. There's a lot of aspects of time which most of us probably never thought of, like how do we know what the correct time is? And Alan actually went to the source, which is Paris, where every month they look at all the...
Don't give it away.
Okay. He'll tell you how it really works out.
Yep.
He also spent, how long, a month, 6 weeks in the Arctic?
Just 2 weeks.
2 weeks in the Arctic, where it's day 24 hours a day. And in order to give him more time and me less, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Burdick now. Let's have a warm welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob. Thank you everybody for turning out. Thank you wherever you may be for tuning in. Yeah, so I think before I dive in, I will give you just a very quick overview of what this book is all about. It started a few years ago with what I realize now were some pretty broad and naive questions. I had read a fair amount about space-time, and Einstein and Hawking and all of that, but it always seemed to me that never really had a whole lot to do with the kind of time that I inhabit from day to day and minute to minute. Like, why does that stoplight seem to be taking so long, and how do I know, right? And it really does seem like time speeds up when I'm having fun, but why is that? And why am I waking up every day at exactly 4:27 a.m. day after day without an alarm clock? It seemed like there's some kind of a time, some sort of time in me and in my cells that is somehow different from the time out there, whatever out there is. And what is that? And where does it come from? There's no physics in the book. There's virtually no philosophy. There are volumes on the philosophy of time, and I just skipped all of that. And this is really a series of kind of explorations and conversations with psychologists and neuroscientists and biologists. And I focus on very tangible experiments and to a certain extent my own experience. Because when we talk about time, it can seem really slippery and really abstract. But at the same time, it is this very intimate, personal thing, and it seems to kind of suffuse everything, and that's what I wanted to get at, and I wanted to try to make the experience, the reading experience, as kind of tactile and as immediate as possible. So out I go into the world of scientists with my naive question, which is, what is time? And pretty much 201, they would reply immediately, well, what do you mean by time? And it turns out that what we call time is basically a big umbrella word that we use to describe a lot of discrete experiences that we don't typically parse out. But very quickly, the perception of time includes things like your ability to know what time it is right now without a clock, your understanding that there's a past and a present and a future, and they kind of go in different directions. Your ability to understand how long an event lasts, whether that's a stoplight, or your innate ability to understand that 3 seconds is actually longer than 1 second, or even 2.5 seconds without counting it out, which is actually something that rats and pigeons can do also. And all of this may seem kind of obvious, but to a kid coming into the world, all of these experiences are revelations. A lot of developmental psychology in the last 50 years, starting with Piaget, has shown that these experiences come online at different ages, and they kind of build up into layers. So you could have, by 3 years old, a kid can pretty well speak without error in both the past and the present tense. But it's not until they're about 4 years old that they understand the difference between before and after. So you can ask, 4 or 5-year-old Jane in January, which is going to come first, July, when your birthday is, or Christmas? And she'll say Christmas, because she hasn't made the distinction between proximity and next? You know, what's next in the forward direction? And underneath all of that, all of those kind of psychological experiences, there's this kind of time that's really hardwired into all of our cells, and that's circadian time. We have these circadian clocks throughout our bodies, and they quite firmly run our physiology over a pretty strict 24-hour cycle. But for our purposes here, I'm actually going to skip all of that. And I want to focus on just really one aspect of what we call time, and that is our experience of now. And again, you know, not space-time or anything, but this now that maybe you feel when you wake up in the middle of the night, and it's kind of coming at you now. This now that's, you know, right here in front of your face. What is that? And it turns out this is actually a question that has been bugging humans for a long time, and maybe even since humans started thinking. Plato, Zeno, Aristotle, they thought about the question of now in terms of physics, and they really tied themselves into knots. You know, is the present some kind of indivisible instant, you know, a dimensionless sliver between the past and the future, or does now have some kind of duration? And if it has a duration, can we measure it? But wait, if it has a duration, can we chop it up into smaller subdivisions? And what's in between those subdivisions? And, you know, is this always the same now, or does it keep changing? And if it changes, when does it change? So you could kind of go around for 3,000 years in circles trying to figure that stuff out. And it gets existential really quickly. So, you know, how do I know that I am the same individual that I was a minute ago, or last week, or last year? How do I change and yet kind of remain continuously me? There's actually an ancient Greek play that addresses this and sort of plays out like a Laurel and Hardy skit. And one guy goes up to another guy that he's lent some money to, and he says, yeah, I'd like my money back. And the second guy says, oh, but you didn't borrow that from me. I'm no longer the same person I was then, any more than a pile of stones from which we've added and removed some pebbles is the same pile of stones. At which point the first guy hits that guy in the face. And that guy says, why'd you do that? And the first guy says, who, me? Then we move forward to about the 4th century, and a theologian named St. Augustine appears. And Augustine has written a book of his own. It's called The Confessions. And it's this kind of combination of autobiography and an extended meditation on God and creation and especially time. And what he essentially does is move the discussion of what is now, what is the present, from physics pretty squarely into the realm of what we would call today's psychology. And he talks a lot about time, but again, it's important to note that what he means by time is quite specifically the present, now. And he describes an experience. He's talking, he's reading something, and these syllables are kind of coming out of him one after another. And at some point he realizes, oh, hey, you know, one of those syllables is twice as long as one of the other syllables that I spoke. And he says, well, but how do I know that? How did I measure that? Did I measure both of those syllables together in the past tense? How do you measure something in the past tense that doesn't exist anymore? Well, then I must have measured them in the present tense, but how do I measure a duration before it's over? And he kind of stirs that around for a while, and he comes up with an insight that is really still with us today. And he says, okay, past, present, future. Well, the past doesn't really exist except in our mind and you know, as memory. And the future doesn't really exist yet except in our mind in terms of expectation. So all we have is the present. And he says, you know, so we don't really have 3 tenses. We really only have one, or if you will, 3 flavors of one, 3 flavors of the present, which he describes like this. The present of past things, which is memory. The present of present things, which is attention. And the present of future things, which is expectation. And the upshot is that all of these presents exist only in our mind. That is the temporal experience. It's in the mind. And he's really into this because he's interested in questions of the soul, and for him, the present is the container of the soul. But he goes back to thinking about this sentence, and these syllables are coming out one after another, and his mind is sort of reaching forward into the future to kind of figure out what's going to come next, and it's sort of stretching back into the past to try to remember what he's already said so he doesn't say it again. And he says, you know, we're stretched between memory and expectation. And he says the vital energy of what I am doing is in tension between the two. And that's you, that's us, this tension spread across the now. And he says time is nothing other than tension, and I would be very surprised if time is not tension of consciousness itself. And I love the phrase, but what I really love is this idea that now isn't actually, the present isn't actually some stuff, it's actually a volume. He compares it to a volume that is contained by consciousness, which is to say that now, the present is the thing, this is the definition of it, now is the thing that our consciousness contains. And if that sounds weird, it comes up centuries later, and it comes basically straight out of the mouth of William James. 1890, William James, Harvard psychologist, brother of Henry James. He's written a big book, textbook called Principles of Psychology, which is a classic almost as soon as it comes out. And James is thinking back over some discoveries that have been made in physiology over the past 50 years. And one of the things that's happening in the 19th century is that clocks are getting better and better. And they can access now not just seconds, but tenths of seconds and hundredths of seconds and even thousands of seconds. And when you start looking at timescales like that, you discover a lot of things, such as the speed of thought is not actually finite. So it was thought that, you know, if I think, okay, I'm going to raise my hand now, that thought process is instantaneous. But along comes, in the 1850s, a German physiologist who gets some subjects and he starts zapping them on their bodies very lightly with an electric shock. So he zaps you on your toe, that's now, and he says, okay, move your head when you feel this. And he does this all around your body, and it turns out there's actually a delay between when you feel it and when you respond. It's like a tenth of a second, and he begins to realize, oh, like our nerves are a lot like telegraph cables, which, by the way, are kind of popping up everywhere in the 19th century. And we know that telegraph cables have delays in them that's sort of inherent. And, well, so our neurons do the same thing. And a transmission, basically the perception of when now is, takes a little bit of time to process. And he says, you know, the time between experiencing a stimulus and becoming aware of it, and the time for the brain to go about the process of perceiving and willing and responding, takes about a tenth of a second. So he suddenly like put a number, he's like quantified what you might call consciousness. And German physiologists, the world of experimental psychology is just getting going, and their whole mandate is to basically come up with an exact description of consciousness. And this is their way in. And they set up all these great experiments to figure out basically how long now is. Because if they can figure out how long now is, they can figure out basically how big our consciousness is. And so the experiments are things like, okay, I'll give you two quick sparks in a row, you know, flick, flick. How close together can I put them and have you still perceive them as distinct events? And the answer is like, you know, 50 milliseconds, a 20th of a second. It's pretty close. Or, you know, say I tap out a rhythm, you know, like this. How long can I stretch that out, and how fast or how slow can I make it, and how many beats can I throw in there, and have you still experienced that rhythm as a whole rhythm, and not kind of lose sight of the whole thing? And, you know, they come up with all sorts of numbers for the length of the present, because pretty much every different way you measure it is going to give you a different number. It's 1/10 of a second, it's 2/100ths of a second, it's 3 seconds long or 5 seconds long. Somebody describes it as the length of a sentence, the length of a spoken sentence. And so James comes along and he's like, forget all of that. You guys, that is like microscopic psychology. That's what he calls it. Let's just get back to our normal experience. You know, that feeling that I'm having as I'm laying awake at night, that now is kind of coming at me in waves, in these kind of discrete moments. And he goes back really to Augustine, and he thinks about the past and the present and the future. And he says, you know, really none of those are helpful. But this fourth thing, which I'm going to call the specious present, that's where all the action is. And he says the specious present is basically a very short duration. Let's not get bogged down in numbers. But it has a beginning and it has an end. And there's like room in there to have a thought or to notice that, oh, hey, that's a sparrow flying across the yard. You know, not like big thoughts, just like enough. And he comes up with all sorts of metaphors for the specious present. It's like a boat, or it's a waterfall, or it's a length of rope. And he calls it the short duration of which we are immediately and incessantly sensible. So once again, he is basically defining now, he's defining the present as the container of our consciousness, the short duration of which we are immediately and incessantly insensible. And there had been some thinking going on at the time that we as humans are actually capable of perceiving empty moments of time, and that time is actually some kind of stuff out there that we might even have like sensors in our ears and we can pick it up as it comes at us. And James is like, no. Look, here I am lying awake at night, and the moments are coming at me. You know, now. And even if there's nothing really going on in there, if you look close, if I look close, there is stuff going on there. And what's going on there is my thoughts. And even if I'm not thinking any thoughts, maybe it's just like the colored lights behind my eyelids, you know, that flicker around. And it's that change, it's that slight change of thought, that slight change of color that we perceive as this passing moment, right? And so it's like, in his view, now is basically our mind listening to itself, observing itself work. And he goes on to say, you know, what that means is basically now the present, this very short thing called the present, is undefined without our mind to fill it. And in fact, it's our mind that gives rise to it. It's not that like a moment, a present moment is sort of out there waiting for us to receive. We're actually conjuring it. He says we tell it off in pulses. We say now, or we count more as we feel it bud. And time seems to flow in discrete units, not because we perceive units of empty time, but because each of our acts of perception is discrete. Now arises again and again just because we say now, again and again. James calls the present, this moment, a synthetic datum. It's not experienced as much as manufactured. And that's what I want to talk about for the rest of the time here. This idea that now isn't really instantly received, it's actually manufactured by us. And because it's manufactured by us, it takes some time to process. Now is not instantaneous. And this is something that we see playing out both in all of our devices and in our bodies and in our minds. Does somebody have a watch or a smartphone with a time on it? What can you tell me? 12:25. Okay, so that exchange that we just had is probably the most fundamental transaction in the living world. We are synchronizing, right? We're coming to an agreement about what now is. You're telling me when now is, and now I know. And either it agrees with me or it doesn't, but you know, the whole point of that conversation is for us to agree, right? And this is probably a good moment to stop very quickly and talk about clocks. So a clock does at least two things. It can be a timer. It can keep track of how much time has gone by or is still to come. So it can look kind of like this. Or if you want to be a little bit more fancy and a little more precise, it can look like that. But a clock, if you do this and add some numbers to it, you're adding a whole new layer of meaning, right? Because it matters where you are now. That where you are at 3 is not actually the same now as where you are at 9, for instance. And what this is telling you, what this stopwatch, this clock is telling you, is the time. That is to say, when now is, right? Heidegger said that the whole point of a clock is to determine the specific fixing of the now. And here's the thing. A clock, for this purpose, is totally useless by itself. Now, in this sense, only means something if it's in relation to the now on another clock. So if I look at the clock and it says noon, well, that means a couple of things maybe. It means, well, it could be the middle of the solar day, right? Noon is the middle of the solar day. The solar day is a clock. It's a 24-hour clock that's beat out by the rotation of the Earth. That's a clock. Or maybe I'm looking and it's noon and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm talking at Google at noon, and everybody there is going to have a watch. And they're thinking, well, he should really be here now. Where is he? Right? So my clock, my thinking about now is really only useful if somebody else is too. And so what time is it right now? Tell me again.
27.
Does anybody here have a watch or a clock that does not have that same time on it? What does yours say?
12:29.
Okay, you, sir, are totally odd, right? Everybody else here, like we're all totally on the same page about when now is. Our clocks are talking to each other, they're getting along, they're chatting really nicely. And we're all agreeing about when now is. And that's one thing to take away here, is that the fixing of the now, as Heidegger described it, is actually a process. It's a conversation among clocks, agreeing about when now is. It's a convention, in a sense. So now you might begin to wonder, well, how is it that all of us, all the rest of us, actually have the same time on our watches and on our clocks? And for that matter, how do we actually know that that is the right time? Well, it's because all of our devices are referencing some other clock further up the stream that is more accurate than ours and that we are synchronizing to. And of course, that one, because you can't just have one clock by itself, is referencing some even more accurate clock further up the chain. It's like it's clocks all the way up. But what is at the top? Let's find out. So once upon a time, the best clock in the world, or the best clock in your neighborhood, you found at the local observatory. There was an astronomer in there. He looked at the motion of the stars, and he figured out when solar noon was. I mean, exactly, like solar noon. And that's really important. And he would then distribute that information locally. And at the beginning, for a while, the Greenwich Royal Observatory was the most accurate, had the most accurate clock in the world. And people from town literally would show up and they would knock on his door. And they would be like, what time is it? Yeah, can I just like check my watch with your watch? And this started to happen so often that he really got annoyed. And so the town hired a guy to do this once a day. And he would go over there and he'd get the time, and then he would wander through town. And if you wanted to check your watch, you would pay him a little bit of money, and you would synchronize to him and indirectly to the observatory. And so time actually starts to become a commodity, right? And you start to see time services. And this all takes a little bit of time. It takes time for that guy to go there and then come around to you. Maybe you want your time a little faster. Well, telegraphs come along, and they make it possible for observatories to start kind of piping the time out much more quickly and much more often during the day. And then this is really happening all across Europe. So all of these observatories are spreading their interpretations of when now is, when solar noon is. And what you get is a landscape that looks like this. I don't know if you can see it here. I'll zoom in. So it's noon in Washington. It's 16 minutes after 1 in Georgetown. It's 26 minutes after 12 in Santiago. I mean, what you notice is there's nobody's on the hour, and there's all these tiny little times everywhere. Here's a similar clock. This drawing was made in 1851, and it represents the various local times in Europe. That other one is from 1862. So this is kind of a problem, especially if you're a railroad and you want your passengers, who are human beings, to be able to understand like your train schedule and to make their train connections. If you're going to Vienna where there's one local time and you're going to Paris where there's another local time and there are like 8 local times in between and you have to make a train connection, it's a serious headache. And even worse, if you're a switch engineer and you need to know exactly when to switch the switch on the tracks so that those 2 trains don't come crashing into each other, you really better know when now is, and you better be right. So that's kind of the moment when the world gets together and says, let's just have 24 time zones. And that's a whole nother discussion that I won't get into, but the point of it is, so we are now getting we're getting our time not from an observatory. We are getting our time from a clock either in Maryland or in Colorado. And these are not observatories. What they do there is, and this is their term, they realize seconds. Now there are 2 kinds of seconds. There's the old kind of second, where if you take the solar day and you divide it up into 86,400 parts, you have 1 second. But in the 50s and 60s, physicists realized, oh, we can get seconds another way. We could like get an isotope of cesium and watch it vibrate 9 billion plus times, and it's basically exactly the same as that. And the great thing about doing it that way is we get the same exact second after second. It's always the same, which isn't actually true of the other one because the Earth is actually slowing down. So that second is really not so reliable. So there are these atomic clocks that we have in Maryland and in Colorado, and they are realizing seconds. And then they take their seconds and they take 86,400 of them and they stack them up, and then they have the 24-hour day. And at any point in that day, your clock or your phone can actually tap in and find out what time it is right now. And they actually get pinged like 13 billion times a day from clocks and devices wanting to know what time it is. But of course, you know, I said there's 1 atomic clock there, but there's not really 1 atomic clock in each of those places. They actually have ensembles of clocks because you can't rely on just 1 clock. So they sort of have a bunch, and they take an average of all the seconds to get you a very good average second. And then they actually compare that to an even more accurate clock that involves transitions of rubidium. It's called a rubidium fountain. So that gives them some modicum of reliability and accuracy. And meanwhile, you know, we're doing this in the United States. France is doing the same thing. England, they've got their own national clocks, national time labs around the world, all realizing their own seconds. And needless to say, none of them agree exactly with another. So we have over us an even bigger time that we all synchronize to. And this time is called Universal Coordinated Time, or UTC. And when this concept was thought up, the French actually wanted to call it TUC, Temps Universel Coordonné. And the English wanted to call it UCT, right? Universal Coordinated Time, and they couldn't agree. So they came up with this other acronym, UTC, which doesn't actually mean anything. But we know, you know, basically what it is. And here's the gist of it. So UTC is managed by the time division of the International Bureau of Weights and Measures, which is a building outside of Paris. And the time division basically is a bunch of people. And what they do once a month, they get all of the national clocks around the world at an appointed time, at the same time, to realize 1 second. And all that data they collect. And they put it through what they call the algorithm. This is what the director of the time division called it, the algorithm. And they sort of average it out to create what she called a fancy average. And they, you know, they kind of take into account, like, oh, maybe that clock hasn't been performing too well lately. You know, we'll kind of weight it a little differently this time. There's a lot of kind of human thought that goes into creating this average. And so creating this time, you know, creating this kind of perfect second, this now, actually takes time. Figuring out the ideal length of a second that they gathered last month takes about 6 days. And what they have at the end of it is actually really kind of the best clock. It's the best possible average of all the best possible realizations of seconds in the world. And they take that and they relay it back to the national labs around the world to synchronize to. And so if you're wondering what the best clock in the world looks like, it looks like this. The best clock in the world is a newsletter. It used to be a paper newsletter. It is now an email. It's called Circular T. And it's a document that the Time Bureau sends out once a month where they basically assess all those seconds from last month. And they tell you, you know, how fast or how slow your second seems to be compared to this fancy average that they've created. And how you might, you know, maybe slow down a little bit for next month, or, you know, speed it up a little bit. So in a sense, now doesn't really exist. I mean, it's like it used to exist, and it's going to exist, but it's always in the process of becoming. And the director of the time service described this universal coordinated time to me as a post-real-time process, right? It's always kind of cooked up after the fact. It's manufactured. And the same kind of thing is actually going on in our brain. We are bombarded by different kinds of data all the time, coming at us at different speeds, both externally and internally. And your brain is trying to kind of judge from all this input arriving at different paces, like when it all began. You know, where it kind of originated from, what was the now that gave rise to these different kinds of data. So like if I flash 2 flashes to you at the same time, and one is bright and one is dim, the bright one is going to reach your visual cortex about 80 milliseconds before the dim one is. And yet you still perceive those as simultaneously. You don't perceive any kind of 80 millisecond delay. So somehow your brain knows that those two even though it's getting 2, you know, delayed signals, somehow it knows that those 2 things belong together originally, and it's going to call that now. And this kind of happens all the time. If I see somebody talking across the room and I see their lips moving and I hear their voice, it's all synced up, right? And that's actually true as long as they're within about 100 feet, because beyond 100 feet, the delay between the sight of their lips moving and the sound is more than about 80 milliseconds. And after that, then I notice the delay. It's easier actually to see with like a car door slamming across the street. And it's like this 80 milliseconds is, it's like our maximum tolerance for things being out of sync. You know, if you're watching TV and the signals go out of sync before, you know, beyond much more than 1/10 of a second, you will notice it and you will be annoyed. But what's interesting is that babies, it turns out, have a very different experience. You can show them a set of moving lips and have the voice that matches it, and you can move those apart by 2/3 of a second. The lips can open and close before they even hear the sound. And as far as the baby is concerned, it's all one event. They kind of live in this very long now. It's very forgiving, what belongs together out there and what doesn't. So I want to just take a break here, or not a break, but there's a, so the brain is actually working really hard to create this sense of a now, and it's trying really hard to hide the work that it's doing from you, but it's not perfect. So there is this illusion called the flash lag illusion. And the way it works is, imagine there's a ring moving across the page, and at some point, across the screen, and at some point there's a flash that fills the interior of it, and the flash keeps going. But that's not actually what you see. You see this. You see the ring as if it has somehow moved past the flash. And I'm going to show you, there's a really short video that will show this to you. This works in sort of different forms. So you've got a moving cube, and it's going past a stationary cube. And they are theoretically aligned, but I don't need to talk. It's explaining everything for you. But you never see them as aligned, right? The moving one always seems to be a little bit past the stationary one. And the reason this happens is because your brain actually has two ways of looking at objects. It has a separate system basically for tracking stationary and moving ones. And actually so if you're going and running for a pop fly, you're running and going after that ball and observing it basically using motion vectors. Really, at no point are you stopping to think, where's that ball right now? Where's that ball right now? Where's that ball right now? That's a question that your mind really doesn't often ask. Imagine a frog that had to ask, where's that fly right now? Where's that fly right now? It wouldn't get very far. And so what's happening here is as the ring moves across, the flash is suddenly asking a question that your brain had not been asking before. You're watching the ring with motion vectors? Yeah? Wrap it up?
5 minutes.
Okay. We're watching it with motion vectors, and suddenly it flashes, and your brain has to ask, where's that ring right now? And the only way it can do that is in the past tense. It waits a little bit, and then it tries to gather all the information that it can within about an 80 millisecond window, and it decides where that ring was. And the reason it gets it wrong is because it knows where the flash was, but it's still gathering data even as that ring continues to move. And that additional data basically biases your perception of the ring in the direction of its motion. Well, I want to leave you with one more thought. And because our sense of now is manufactured, it's also very fungible. And psychologists really love to do experiments that sort of tease this out. So if I show you a sad face for a second on the screen, and then I show you a happy face for a second on the screen, the happy face will actually seem to last a little bit longer. If I show you an angry face, that one will seem to last a little longer too. And that's because for various reasons, our emotions seem to alter our sense of duration, of how long things last. But it's more complicated than that, because if I do that experiment, if I observe that experiment and I put like a pencil between my teeth, the effect totally goes away. And the reason is because now, all the time as we interact in real life, we are mimicking each other's gestures and facial movements. If you watch two people eating lunch together, if they're good friends, pretty soon they'll fall into sync. And they'll smile at the same time, and they'll raise their cup at the same time. And seems to be a pretty basic expression of of empathy. And even if I show you a series of faces on a screen so quickly that you don't notice them, if a smiling face comes up, you will smile too. And what seems to be going on as we interact and as we have that experience is that we are stepping into basically the other person's skin and trying to adopt their rhythm too, right? So the reason that the effect goes away when I put the pencil in between my teeth is because I can no longer mimic the smiling or the angry face that I see. And because I can't mimic it, I don't experience their kind of distorted duration of time. And this is really, again, is kind of an essential aspect of our sociality. We are stepping in and out of each other's skins all the time. And it's been asked, well, what good is it to have such a fallible clock, you know, a clock that you can kind of bend so easily? And the better question really is to ask what it does for us. And that is that our slightest social exchanges and our glances and our smiles really gain their strength from our ability to synchronize them amongst ourselves and to kind of know gesturally when the other person is, when now is, right? We bend time to make time with each other. So just to circle back to what I said earlier, you can have a clock, but you can't have just one. And now, all of us, really, each of us, is a clock. We are the sum of our cells, the sum of our circadian rhythms. We are a consciousness going around saying, now, now, now. What, you're now? You know, but we're trying to figure it all out. And what I want you to think about is sort of as you look around and you think about the clock that's sitting to your left or to your right is really what you are sharing in the most literal sense is now. And in that sharing, you are creating a bigger clock. You are creating something even bigger than yourselves. Heidegger said, this time now as I look at my watch, what is this now? Am I the now? Is every other person the now? Yes, but really that's half the story because we together are the now too. My now is over. Now it's your turn.
In the study about the babies, how do they tell that their perceptions are delayed?
They use eye trackers, and they basically they can have a baby watch a pair of monitors, one with a set of moving lips, and first they watch it silently, and then they watch it with sound on, and they are simultaneously watching another set of lips that is saying something totally different. And then suddenly the sound comes on, and they look to see which screen the infant is looking at. The infant is basically trying to match the sound that it's suddenly hearing with one of the two sets of lips that it's seeing. And they can pretty quickly tell using eye trackers which one the baby picks. And the baby typically always picks the right one.
Hi, I'm interested in kind of the process you took to approach writing the book. And since this was kind of more of your definition and your exploration of the now, how did you decide who to seek out and what sources to use? And it says you went to, going to the Arctic and going to Paris. And how did you kind of take all of that and put it together into the book?
It took a long time. It took about 10 years. There was a lot that I left out, and one of the things that happened in the course of this book, I actually started this book about 6 weeks before my kids were born, and I have twin boys, and they're now 10 years old. And in the process, in that 10 years, I started watching them as they grow, as they got older, kind of grow into these different aspects of time. And simultaneously, I'm kind of coming to grips with the concept of being a parent and what that means in terms of responsibility and my own relationship to time. And so that arc is really the sort of container that everything else is contained within.
I have a question. So for me, and probably for everybody, the now is like a continuous. And what I understand from your talk, you say that time is actually, we perceive time as snapshots, which are about tenths of a second. So that just means that we think is this snapshots like a CPU, you know, every like cycle has some operation. So does the brain work in this way? Does it work in like snapshot way, like discrete way?
I mean, there's a school of thought that thinks that, you know, and the kind of question is like, is time sort of going by us and we're looking out a train window and it's just passing by? Or, you know, are we sort of planting our window on the world and making it kind of chunk that way? And that seems to be more of what's going on, but it's not necessarily a strict, you know, 80 millisecond or tenth of a second, you know, unit, and there's certainly no regular beat to it. I mean, it's definitely not like film going through a camera, you know, these kind of still frames that you add up and then speed up and it suddenly seems like motion.
Most of us here have had some mathematical training, and I think it'd be easy to be kind of facile and say, well, a time is of zero, infinitely small. I mean, points don't have any dimension, but I think what you've shown is that that's not really the way it is with human beings, right?
Yeah, and it's, I mean, you know, it's almost circular. I mean, we can't perceive an indivisible moment. So what we call now must have some duration, however you want to measure it. And really, almost by definition, that duration is the length of the thought that we spend thinking about it, right?
Let's thank Mr. Burdick for coming here and talking to us on this rainy day.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you.